You are watching Beyond the News. Like, comment, and subscribe.
We're digging into our source material today, which is an article called Modern Relationship Crisis: The Female Pandemic Narrative.
Okay.
And it seems this term, provocative as it is trying to capture frustrations some men are expressing about, perceived shifts in female behavior and how that's impacting relationships.
It's definitely a loaded term, no question. And it signals a pretty specific viewpoint right off the bat.
Absolutely.
So, our goal here isn't really to endorse it, right? But more to understand the arguments, the concerns that are being raised within this narrative
Exactly. We want to unpack the claims, the frustrations behind them.
and see what this perspective, might tell us about modern male female dynamics, which are, let's face it, complex.
Very complex. Okay, so let's get into that central claim then. The core argument seems to be this: there's been a significant shift in how women behave,
Hmm.
and that this shift is negatively impacting relationships, marriage, even family structures. And this is leading to, well, a lot of frustration among many men.
That's the gist of it, yeah. This narrative suggests many men perceive a noticeable and for them unwelcome change
Right.
in how women approach relationships, family life, and it's causing feelings of maybe instability,
Nah.
dissatisfaction.
And a key part of this perceived shift is described as a rise in masculine energy in women.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase a bit.
Yeah, because it's not about, physical stuff. The source frames it more as a behavioral shift. Women becoming more combative, dominant, less willing to compromise.
It's interesting how that masculine energy label is being interpreted here.
Hmm.
The source suggests it means women are like less interested in traditional nurturing or collaborative roles.
Hmm.
And if you look at the reported consequences, well, this narrative argues men are getting more hesitant
Hesitant to commit.
to commit. Yeah. Long-term relationships, marriage,
Hmm.
it's all led back to these perceived behavioral shifts.
And here's where it gets, well, quite specific. The source brings up a grievance that some men feel women aren't interested in building a relationship from the ground up anymore.
Right.
Instead, the perception is that women are looking for partners who are, already established.
Financially secure,
Exactly, able to provide for them, maybe even their extended families.
which, really highlights potentially differing expectations in relationships today.
It does.
This idea of wanting a ready-made partner, as the source puts it, it's contrasted pretty sharply with reports from some men who say they're experiencing something else entirely,
Like what?
like a lack of emotional intimacy, feeling belittled, emotionally neglected.
Oof.
Yeah. And even finding out their partners are still connected somehow to former lovers, it paints a picture of, well, significant challenges from this specific viewpoint.
Absolutely. And, that connects to another big concern the source highlights: perceived promiscuity,
Ah,
both present and past. It seems discovering a partner's past sexual history can be a real sticking point for some men within this narrative.
yes, and it's important to try and understand the values operating here from this perspective.
Okay.
For men who really prioritize loyalty, emotional safety, especially if they're thinking long term commitment,
Right.
a partner's extensive past, sexually speaking, can feel like, well, like a breach of those values.
I see.
And the source suggests it gets even more complicated when these same women then expect, unwavering commitment and support now.
So the feeling that results among some men, according to this article, is that they're facing pretty limited options. Slim pickings is the phrase used.
It's stark language, isn't it?
It really is. The perception seems to be that the dating pool is full of people carrying what they see as like a lot of emotional baggage
Hmm.
and maybe unrealistic expectations.
Exactly. That language really conveys a sense of deep disillusionment. Like the options for building the kind of committed relationship they want are somehow damaged goods,
Oh.
almost.
Okay, let's shift slightly to the X factor. The source uses that term. This seems like a particularly sensitive point in this whole narrative.
It does.
What exactly does that cover?
Well, what's interesting is the range of things the source puts under this umbrella. It could be subtle stuff, like, frequently mentioning an ex, comparing the current partner to them.
Okay, yeah.
But it also includes more overt things like actively engaging with past partners, keeping those emotional doors open.
Which would understandably feel unsettling.
Very unsettling for the current partner, yeah,
Yeah.
especially if they're invested.
And the emotional impact on the men in these situations. The source uses the term soul crushing.
Wow.
which really underlines the kind of distress, the sense of betrayal that can apparently arise.
It really speaks to that fundamental need for emotional security in a relationship, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
When you feel your partner's emotional energy might be divided or still heavily invested somewhere else, that's bound to create deep insecurities, feelings of inadequacy.
Yeah, definitely. So, given all these perceived challenges, the source then talks about how some men are, well, reacting.
Right.
It describes a segment of men who are sort of opting out of traditional relationships in different ways. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, if you connect it back to the frustrations we've just discussed, it starts to seem like a maybe a logical, if somewhat drastic, response for some individuals.
Hmm.
The source mentions a few paths, some men choosing to stay single,
Okay.
others only engaging in casual, non committal interactions.
Right.
And interestingly, it mentions men actually leaving Western dating culture entirely, looking elsewhere perhaps for different dynamics.
Wow. Okay.
And then it also touches on philosophies like MGTOW, men going their own way, which explicitly prioritizes male self interest and independence from relationships with women.
And the reasons they give for opting out, they really echo the complaints we've been talking about, don't they?
You do.
The source emphasizes that they're often prioritizing their own peace, their personal goals,
Mhm.
their well being over what they see as like this chaotic, negative relationship landscape.
Precisely. It's framed as a conscious choice, stepping away from something they view as potentially harmful or just unfulfilling.
To focus on themselves.
Exactly. To concentrate on their own needs, their own aspirations.
Now, it is important to say the source does offer some nuance here. It doesn't paint with too broad a brush.
That's true.
It acknowledges, not all women fit this pattern. And crucially, that men aren't blameless either.
Yes. The source does briefly touch on counter arguments, alternative perspectives.
But as I mentioned,
Well, it acknowledges the broader societal context. Things like evolving gender roles, rising divorce rates, economic pressures, social media's influence.
all the big shifts,
Right. All factors that have contributed to women, in some ways, adopting roles or behaviors traditionally seen as masculine.
out of necessity sometimes.
Often a necessity, yeah. An adaptation to a changing world where perhaps traditional marriage doesn't offer the same assumed security it once did.
And the source seems to make a key distinction there between that adaptation, that sort of survival mechanism, and what some men perceive as crossing a line into entitlement, where independence becomes, in their view, disrespect within the relationship. That feels critical.
That's a really sharp observation. The source does hint at that tension, where adaptive behaviors may be initially about navigating a complex world,
Right.
get interpreted by some men as like a rejection of partnership ideals, a disregard for their role or needs.
So, where does this leave us?
Mhm.
Ultimately, the source seems to point towards needing mutual accountability,
Yeah, that comes through.
stressing that healthy relationships need emotional intelligence from both sides, taking responsibility
Hmm.
and, basic mutual respect.
Exactly. The underlying issue, as this narrative frames it, seems to be this potential breakdown, where maybe women feel unsupported by men. And then men, in turn, feel alienated or undervalued by women. It's like a negative cycle,
A cycle that undermines the whole foundation.
pretty much.
And the source finishes by calling for, well, honest conversations.
Yeah, open dialogue.
Free from blame, free from hate, ideally, with the goal of actually rebuilding better relationship dynamics. It suggests that even acknowledging these frustrations within this controversial female pandemic frame
Even that,
is maybe a necessary first step towards finding some kind of solution.
precisely. While the term itself is, highly contentious,
Yeah.
the source seems to argue that the anxieties, the frustrations being expressed, they deserve some thoughtful consideration, some constructive dialogue.
If we want more fulfilling relationships.
If we hope to foster more fulfilling, more balanced relationships going forward, yeah.
We've uncovered a fascinating discovery, the Generation Z female. As you can see here by these chest balloons, they were often inflated not for survival, but rather a currency called likes and comments. Though her brain has decayed, her lips remain intact. Archaeologists believe this to be lip injection fillers. The bone origin is from Miami, but the implantation derives from China. Interesting. However, our discovery stopped there by no means. As you can see, an artificially enhanced buttocks known as a BBL, a Brazilian buttocks lift, or what they like to call a guillot. A guillot. Oh, guillot!
but me learn to do it out. Enough time my stomach a grumble, man, not for hold it out. Me push through the storm, now it tougher than steel. The struggle build me up, so the real don't feel, yeah, yeah. Me no need for have plenty. All the pressure come me in a something heavy. Watch me rise, watch me grow, watch me glow. From the gutter to the top, man, I never move slow. What the girl them used to love, farmer man, educated man. No badness them run down, we are changing order. Let go the badness thing, hear me now. The girl them fill up farmer man, educated man, not a gun man. Them used to